Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
In the winter of 2019, I met a gentleman on LinkedIn. No big deal. We meet lots of people on LinkedIn. The gentleman's name was Tim Schur, and I actually interviewed him on my podcast. And that interview is episode 117, and it came out October 24th of 2019. And what we talked about on that podcast was the psychology of working the room. So great episode. I won't go listen to the episode. I won't rehash it here. Just talked about the different personalities in a room. Anyhow, let me talk a little bit about Tim. Tim is he's kind of a mindset coach, if you will, or an executive mind coach. He helps entrepreneurs and small business owners 10x their sales and their profits. He works with people eliminating their subconscious programming. It's hypnotherapy, things along those lines. And I was very impressed with Tim when I initially spoke with him. I remember having sort of a bad day, and he just kind of talked me out of my funk. And I shared with him in a first call lots of things that I've never shared with other people. And he said, yeah, I just have a way of kind of bringing things out of people. And so I became really a fan of Tim. And Schur is spelled Shurr. I'll put a link to his website and his LinkedIn as well, so you can look him up. Good person to follow. Got a lot of great books. One Belief Away, Get Out of Your Way. But one of the things that I did was I actually got, I subscribed to a newsletter that he does. And so occasionally I'll get, as often as he puts them out, I'll get his newsletters. And I get a lot of newsletters from lots of people. And I can't say that I read them all. Well, I can say I don't read them all. It just depends upon what the topic is, and I think that's probably true of a lot of us. If it's something that really resonates with us, then great. I'll sit and I'll read it, and if not, I won't. But one that came out this week that really caught my attention. I think a way to catch my attention if the word relationship is somewhere in the title. So the title to this is Don't Let This Self-Sabotage Ruin Your Relationships. It caught my attention. I'm going to read that. And it was interesting, and I want to share what Tim has to say because I think there's a lot of value in this for us. And I'll quote from time to time. I don't want to totally rip this thing off. I'll read a little here and there and offer some commentary. But he starts out, quote, self-deception is an insidious tribulation that unfortunately everyone struggles with, including you and me. And that's one of the things I love about Tim is that he is, if you listen to his podcast, he's very vulnerable. He's very open, right? He's having a bad day. He'll get on his podcast. One of the things that he had talked about on one of his podcasts is that he was in the running to provide some consulting. He was down with a company between him and another company, and he didn't get it. And leaving with that horrible news, he did a podcast just talking about how he was going to work his way through it. And I love the notion that people can be vulnerable. And if somebody tells me that they're always doing well, always doing great, yeah, I don't believe it. Anyhow, so self-deception is something that we all deal with. He goes on to say it's an unconscious self-sabotage that has a massive problems for businesses, teams, families, marriages, because it causes communication breakdowns, frustration, and general unhappiness in relationships. unquote. If you're a fan of this podcast, you know that I look at relationships as relationships. Things that are happening in our personal lives also happen in our business lives. Um, and he goes on to share that self-deception occurs when we treat others, when we stop treating others as our equal, as people with the same hopes, dreams, worries, and fears. In other words, we're looking at other people through a different lens than we look at ourselves. We all have hopes, we all have dreams, we all have insecurities. Everybody does, and we start looking at other people like, well, they're, you know, as he puts it here, we view them as objects, problems, or nuisances to tolerate, appease, or manipulate. And he goes on to share. Again, he's somebody who is very open, very vulnerable. He said, "I have a particularly challenging time remaining kind, loving, and compassionate driving around Los Angeles." Tim is from Indiana. He spends a lot of time in Indiana, but he does a lot of work in the LA area. A lot of companies. It's a hotbed. But he goes on to say, traffic is always congested, even on side streets, and people are constantly honking the horn at one another. Back in Indiana, you had to almost crash into someone before anybody hit their horn. But here, it's like an annoying Morse code where the message is always the same. Get out of my way. I'm more important than you. Uh, I think that's true of a lot of big cities, right? I mean, I grew up in a small town, went to college in a small town. Columbus is not a huge town. It's really not. It's a big town, small town feel to it. But I'll go to Chicago or I'll visit my son in Miami. I'm in other big cities. I've been to New York. Man, it's a whole different lifestyle trying to drive there. I just can't even do that. But when people behave like that, or he goes on to share that, when people are behaving like that, kindness and love and compassion, they all, they fade. And he says aggravation kicks in. He says, I find myself driving more aggressively now as well. And he says, I feel justified. They cut me off. They're driving too slow. I mean, he's basically become them. And with self-deception, what he's doing, he's making the other drivers the problem in his mind. And, just, whizzing around town, it's, they're to blame. And he justifies this poor behavior that, well, everyone else is driving like this, so I'm going to drive like this, is what he goes on to say. So when we're self-deceived, we justify poor decisions and make, we basically, we morph to the people that are around us and justify our bad behavior. We're just being like everybody else. And, it's easy to spot in other people. It's hard to spot in ourselves. The reality is we don't need to morph to other people. I get it. When you're driving in traffic and everybody's, when I drive in Michigan, when I live in Ohio, my family's up in Michigan. When I cross the line over into Michigan, the speed limit changes. It increases, and you can feel it. And you kind of need to keep up, or you need to get over to the right. And so you can't, traffic's a different thing. But, when people are treating you a certain way, that doesn't justify you mimicking that. Other people are mean, so I'm going to be mean. No, you don't get to be mean. It doesn't, well, you can do whatever you want, but it doesn't excuse it. It doesn't give you a pass. He goes on here and he talks about marriages. The secret to having I'm going to replace marriage with a relationship. A secret to having a happy relationship is learning how to blow off and not take comments personally in the heat of the moment. Certainly true in a relationship. You have these little tiffs. I'm not immune to them. Been married coming up on 29 years. They happen. They happen so often that you don't even, it's just, you kind of ignore them. And it's kind of the same thing with relationships. You just have to realize that people are doing things in relationships and it's not necessarily intended to hurt you. It's just something that's happening. Who knows what's going on behind it, but it's not personal to you, is I guess what I'm trying to say. So the whole notion of self-deception is that we're looking around and we're seeing how other people are treating us, or we're seeing how other people are behaving, and we justify that in our own behavior. And it's it doesn't justify it. It doesn't give us the right to be mean-spirited. I mean, we see it a lot in social media, don't we? You see people are out there, and I call them Twitter muscles, right? They're going to, puff up their chest and they're going to say certain things because they can, and other people are doing it, and it's okay. It's not okay. There's a way to behave, and it doesn't matter how other people behave. You behave the way you're going to behave. I know um, a lot of people will look to Donald Trump and say, well, this is how Donald Trump, and he's created this environment. No, Donald Trump behaves the way he behaves. And you can say, well, that's causing other people to behave that way. Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but it doesn't give you an excuse. You have control over yourself. And if you start behaving in a manner that's bombastic, or whatever, it doesn't even necessarily have to be, like Donald Trump. Um, if you start behaving in that way, fine, you can go ahead and behave that way, but you don't get a pass because somebody else is doing it. I think it was Gandhi who said that, if an eye for an eye were the reality, we would everyone would be blind, because we'd just constantly be taking an eye from somebody, constantly going, retaliating. You did this, so I get to do this. And what we really need to do is we need to just stop and say, okay, I am going to behave a certain way. Plain and simple. That's how I'm going to behave. And that's the right way to behave. And it doesn't matter how other people behave. You need to come into your relationships just, with a rock solid foundation of how you're going to behave. And if other people are late, it doesn't give you a right to be late. It doesn't give you an excuse. You still need to be on time. If other people interrupt you, it doesn't give you the right to interrupt them. You just need to behave the way you need to behave. I'm not saying you need to be pushed around. I think it's important when I talk to people who, when people interrupt me, I'll let them know. I try to be nice about it. It's like, hey, listen, you've interrupted me twice. Are you going to give me a chance to talk? If not, I'll let you speak your piece and then we'll be done, because I'm not going to continually get a half a sentence out and then listen to a 3-paragraph monologue, debating that my half a sentence. But I'll let people know, and a lot of times people are like, yeah, I know, I do that, and they're better for it. But me interrupting them doesn't make it better. It makes the whole situation worse. Here's an interesting part of the newsletter. People betray their initial feelings of wanting to help another or do the right thing all the time. Here are some examples. Have you ever let the elevator door close even though you saw someone approaching because you were in a hurry or didn't like how they looked? Have you ever thought that you should fill up your car with gas before you get home so your spouse didn't have to in the morning, but then decided not to because you were tired and they were perfectly capable of doing it themselves? Have you ever promised your kids that you'd take them to the movies and then backed out at the last minute because something more important came up? Or skipped a few pages ahead while reading to your toddler because they wouldn't know the difference anyway and need to go to bed? Or yelled at your teenager for complaining about school and then venting to your spouse about how awful work was for the next hour. He goes on to say, I view myself as compassionate, self-aware, successful, emotionally intelligent, yet all those examples were actions I've taken. Again, I love him. He's great because he's willing to do those things. Really what he's getting at here is we all need to take a close look at ourselves, take a look at our actions and our inactions, and challenge ourselves. We can be better. We're not perfect. It's easy to look at ourselves as perfect, but that doesn't really help us improve. And if we, stop deceiving ourselves that, okay, we're misbehaving because other people are misbehaving, more or less what we're doing is we're looking at our actions and judging them with a gray scale, right? Shades of gray. Well, I do this because other people do it. But looking at other people's actions and just judging them in black and white. Well, they drive crazy, so they are crazy. My crazy driving is just because they're crazy driving, and I just need to do that to just to be safe. So we need to take a close look at ourselves and just try and be better. As he says here, let's commit to being a bit more patient and understanding, especially with our family, especially with our relationships. Just kind of a great thought to take through the day.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.